Welcome back. We're on deck. Prep Test 85, Section 3. Start here with question number 23. Issue: which one of the following, if true, most helps to explain the researcher's findings? Okay. Researchers have found that some unprotected areas outside a national park that was designed to protect birds have substantially higher number of certain bird species than comparable areas inside the park. Just something about this that's, it seems very straightforward. It's language we readily understand. When you're in this test, really focus. I think it's important not to take this test in order. So, I mean, this may turn out to be difficult, but not because it was written to be difficult. So I'd want to be, in other words, I wouldn't want to have run out of time on question number 21 and never have gotten to question number 23. Okay, so let me go over this one more time. Researchers have found that, there were unprotected areas outside a national park, and the park itself was designed to protect birds. But those areas outside have substantially higher number of certain bird species than comparable areas in the park. So, it's like a paradox. How does that happen? How do you end up with more birds outside the protected area, right, than in the protected area? Okay. Well, let's find out. Would A help explain this? Moose are much more prevalent inside the park, where hunting is prohibited, than outside the park. And moose eat much of the food that birds need to survive. Again, I'm not saying don't read B, C, D, and E, but A is the answer. And if you proceed to read B, C, D, and E, read to dismiss. Read with an attitude. Read with, I got the answer unless you knock my socks off. So, A makes all the sense in the world. B. The researchers also found that some unprotected areas outside of the park have substantially higher numbers of certain reptile species than comparable areas inside the park. Okay, I don't know where you go with that. I guess you could imagine that birds would feed on the reptiles, but I guess you could also imagine that the reptiles would be dangerous to the birds. So that's not really explaining it. Certainly not the way A does. C, researchers tagged a large number of birds inside the park. 3 months later, some of those birds were recaptured outside the park. Well, some is, how many? How many is some? So again, the ambiguity there is, it's just nowhere close to choice A. D, both inside the park and just outside of it, there are riverside areas containing willows and other waterside growth that bird species thrive on. Okay, so it's in both places. But that's not helping to explain. And E, the park was designed to protect endangered bird species. But some of the bird species that are present in higher numbers in the unprotected areas are also endangered. Okay, so let me try. Let's see if I can get my arms around that again. The park was designed to protect endangered bird species. Okay, I got that right. But some of the bird species that are present in higher numbers in the unprotected are also endangered. That's not explaining to me why they're not in protected area. So again, everything in the context of when you read A, and A happens here to be the answer, it allows you to basically dismiss B, C, D, and E, and don't spend a lot of time dismissing them. Okay, question number 24 is a flaw, right? The reasoning in the argument is flawed in that the argument. 24. A recent poll of a large number of households found that 47% of those with a cat had at least one person with a university degree, while 38% of those with a dog had at least one person with a university degree. And this should, yellow light should go up, it's not red lights. In the world of flaws, it's very common to be tested on the distinction between percentages and real numbers. And if you have a percent, but you don't have a real number, you have an incomplete picture. Similarly, if you have a real number, but you don't have a percent. You have an incomplete picture. So we have an incomplete picture. So where they're going to go with this, likely, is that they're going to rely on the fact that the percentage is higher among cats, right, than it is presented among dogs, to lead you down the primrose path, that therefore more people with college degrees have cats than dogs, and we'll discuss in a moment. So, okay, so again, I'm directed to households. 47% of those with a cat had at least one person with a university degree. 38% of households with a dog had at least one person with a university degree. Here comes the conclusion clearly. People who hold university degrees are more likely to live in a household with a cat than with a dog. And the answer is no, that's not been established. It's a really important area, and they test on it consistently. So if you get this, you're prepared for what you're going to get on the test. It's just going to be a different example of the same principle. So here's the deal. We're referred to a large number of households. Okay. And 40% of those with a cat. Well, 47% of those with a cat don't tell me how many. What is the number of households, right? So if the number of households is 1,000, and you say of those with a cat, well, 47% of those with a cat, right? We're going to have somebody with a BA in there, but 47% of what number? Of the 1,000, do 200 have cats? Do 600 have cats? Do 100? So, okay, let's say 100 of the, because if you have an even number, if it's the same number, if you have 500 have cats and 500 have dogs, right? And 47% have cats and 38% have dogs, right? Well, then this is right. But it's flawed, so that's not what they're giving you, right? So what they're giving you is half the truth is the darkest of lies, and this is half the truth, right? Which is yes. But it's 47% of what number? So if 100 households, if you're talking about 100 households, at 47% of those who have a cat, well, then you have 47 households. Then you say, well, 38% of households with a dog, but you haven't told me how many households have a dog. So if 500 households have a dog, that's a big B. If 500 households have a dog, then you have to take 37% of 500, which is going to be far larger than 47% of 100. So that's it. There's no way they can go with this. A, it ignores the possibility that a significant number of households might have both a cat and a dog. No. B, takes for granted that there are not significantly more households with a dog than ones with a cat. And if you're prepared for that, I mean, B's the answer. And if you're doing IRAC, you have it in your mind before you ever look at it. And I look here at 23 and 24. Neither one of these is real challenging, I don't think, if you're prepared. Neither one of these necessarily is and I don't believe they're even close to being what I would characterize as a Yale item. It's just not. And again, if you go past B, you're acting like an academic student, a college student, and that's not what they're testing for. B's the answer. C, fails to consider how many of the households have at least one person without a university degree. It's not about people without it. D, fails to consider to what extent people with university degrees participate in decisions about whether their households have a cat or a dog. How in God's name could you pick D? And E, it ignores the possibility that two things can be correlated without being causally connected. They're just throwing fog balls out there so that if you don't have the answer in your mind and you're reading E, because you haven't done the IRAC analysis, right? So you haven't done the application, you're not there, and you're reading E and you're trying to figure out what E says, you're a loser. All right. And with respect now to question number 25, which one of the following arguments is most closely parallel in its reasoning? Okay, let me see what I have here. Keeler wanted the Institute to receive bad publicity. So Keeler has a motive. He and Green were the only ones in a position to tell the press about the Institute's potentially embarrassing affiliations. Okay. But Green had no reason to do so. Okay, so one person has a motive to say something bad comes up, and there are only two people who know about it, but the second person had no reason to expose it. And therefore, so goes the argument, therefore it must have been Keeler that notified the press. Again, let's see what the answer choices bring, but I don't see this as the heaviest. This is certainly not the most difficult argument or law to understand. So now let me see what we have here. A, the only people who had any reason to write the anonymous letter were Johnson and Ringwald. Johnson and Ringwald both deny doing so. So so it's not the same right now. Ringwald, however, admits that she has written anonymous letters in the past, thus it must have been Ringwald who wrote the letter. There's a difference between saying they both deny something and only one person is in a position to have a reason to do it. So, no. B, Carter and Whitequill were the only ones who had any motive. So motive is good, right? Had any motive to bribe the public official. But Whitequill would have been too fearful that the bribery might somehow be made public. Carter, therefore, must be the person who bribed the public official. Well, if you didn't have anything else, I guess, but that's kind of going the other way. This is saying that one person, it's not that one person had a motive to harm and one about harming. This is about one person would have been too fearful and so remained silent as opposed to releasing the information. So I don't believe B is not the answer. C. Other than Helms and Lipinski, no one had access to the equipment on Thursday, the day it was tampered with. Okay? Thus, since Helms had reason to tamper with the equipment and Lipinski did not, it must have been Helms who did it. It's the answer. And again, you can keep reading, but they can't give you two credited answers. And that is so, the legal expression would be, that's just on all fours. It's just right there. It's within the four corners of the evidence and it's just on all fours. G, when the bridge was, so I wouldn't be reading D&E, right? I'd be taking 23, 24, 25, none of which I find to be all that challenging, and I would be reinvesting that time in the ones I did find more challenging. When the bridge was designed, Fleming and Solano were the only ones capable of creating such a design. Fleming, however, had a strong reason to take credit for the design if it were his. Thus, since no one took credit for the design, it must have been the work of Solano. Well, again, it's not capturing the tone or there's certainly similarities, but it's not one person has a motive to injure and the other person doesn't, and therefore the person has the motive to injure. He's not there. And E, Cutter and Rango are the only serious candidates for designing the new monument. Rango has designed several beautiful monuments and has connection to the selection committee. Therefore, it will probably be Rango who is awarded the job of designing it. And there's just no way that's more closely parallel than C. So again, with 25, I don't think it was all that challenging. The answer is C for Caligula, and we've now wrapped up questions 23 to 25 in section 3 in exam 85.